All right, let's dive in. Today, we're all about Poshmark, but not just, the basics. We're going deep on the hustle part, turning this into a real side hustle. And thankfully, you guys provided the perfect guide, 1,000 ways to hustle, Poshmark. So many tips. We're here to find the real gems.
It really is interesting how the guide approaches Poshmark. It's not just about listing stuff and hoping it sells. They really highlight the social, the community building aspect. That's what drives the sales.
Yeah, so less like eBay, more like, I don't know, like a giant fashion swap meet online, but with style, with a little bit of that influencer marketing magic.
That's actually a pretty good analogy, but there's a big difference. Poshmark is really all about branding.
Yeah.
Your closet is like your little fashion empire. You curate an aesthetic. That's what draws people in, not just random deals.
So we're not just selling clothes, we're selling a whole vibe. And that starts with the Poshmark closet itself, right? I noticed the guide is really strict on the photos, no blurry selfies allowed.
For sure.
Yeah.
Those photos are your first impression. Think magazine quality natural light, clean backgrounds, show the clothes from different angles. And if you can, model the clothes.
Yeah.
You want to see how it looks on a real person.
Right, because a hanger just doesn't do it justice. The guide even says to keep your photos consistent, part of your branding. Like it's a mini lookbook for each item, not just a quick pick.
Exactly. And then alongside those awesome visuals, you need descriptions that are just as good. This is where I think a lot of people mess up. You can't just list the basic stuff, the brand, the size. You got to paint a picture with words. Detailed descriptions, engaging, almost like little blog posts. That's what helps things stand out.
It's like storytelling. You're creating an experience for each piece.
Yeah.
And being totally honest about any flaws, no matter how small.
Yeah.
That has to build trust with buyers, right?
Oh, absolutely. Transparency is key. But here's where things get interesting. The guide really emphasizes how Poshmark's algorithm works. They say it actually rewards certain behaviors. So it's not JGST about listing great stuff. It's about how you act on the platform.
Ooh, okay. Give us the secrets. What does the algorithm love?
Sharing. The more you share your listings, the more people see them. It's like the #1 sign of an active user. And the algorithm loves that. Share to your followers, share in the Posh parties. There's even this thing they call Posh End List.
Hold on. Posh Endless. That sounds helpful, but
Yeah.
wouldn't I be boosting the competition if I'm sharing their stuff?
That's a good point. The guide doesn't really address that directly. It's something to think about for sure. It's like balancing supporting the community with making your own listings stand out.
So strategic sharing is key. But aside from sharing, what else does that algorithm want from me?
Think like a marketer. Have sales, bundle discounts, limited time, offers anything that creates excitement and makes people want to buy NOWs.
You're right. Got to create that urgency. But even with all that, I feel like good customer service has to play a role, right?
Oh, huge GE role. The guide really stresses that. Quick responses, polite communication, fast shipping. That's how you turn a one-time buyer into a loyal fan.
So it's the whole experience, the whole brand that matters. Makes sense. But now I'm curious, where does all this amazing stuff even come from? We've got the Poshmark strategy, but what about sourcing it?
The guide mentions a few options, each with its own good and bad sides. Thrifting, that's a classic, of course. But it's not just about finding cheap clothes. It's about knowing what sells well on Poshmark, having an eye for it.
So I need to think like a Poshmark buyer when I'm at the thrift store. What should I be looking for?
Think brands, styles, trends. What's popular with the Poshmark crowd? Remember those well-curated closets we talked about? What pieces would fit in those?
Okay, so thrifting is strategic hunting. But the guide also mentions online marketplaces. What's the deal with that?
Sometimes you can find stuff that's priced too low and resell it for a profit. But you got to know the market value. You got to have a feel for what's a good deal.
So it's digital bargain hunting. But then the guide mentions even more advanced options like wholesale buying.
Exactly. If you want to make Poshmark a serious business, wholesale lets you buy in bulk and control what you've got.
That sounds a little intimidating. Any advice for aspiring wholesale buyers from the guide?
They really emphasize research. Before you jump into wholesale, you got to know the market, factor in all the costs, and have a plan for how you'll price and sell everything.
So it's not just about getting a good deal. It's about understanding the whole process. But for those of us not ready for wholesale, there's always
Upcycling. The guide actually loves this one, taking old clothes and turning them into something unique and stylish.
Oh, that's cool. It's creative A&D sustainable. So we've got thrifting, online marketplaces, wholesale, upcycling.
Yeah.
So many ways to source. What's next on the Poshmark hustle checklist?
Now it's about leveling up, building a brand that really stands out.
Okay, tell me everything. How do I go from Poshmark seller to Poshmark icon?
One word, niche. The guide is big on this. It's not enough to just sell clothes. You got to specialize.
So instead of trying to appeal to everyone, I should focus on a certain style or brand or aesthetic.
Exactly. Think vintage, bohemian, streetwear designer, whatever fits you and your target audience.
I love that. It's like building a little fashion empire within Poshmark, and that probably makes branding a lot easier too.
Oh, absolutely. A unique name, a consistent logo, a killer photography style. Those all add up to a memorable brand.
And I bet social media is a big part of this too, right?
You know it. The guide says to use platforms like Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest to show off your Poshmark stuff and get people to visit your closet. It's about creating a whole multi-platform fashion experience.
Wow, a whole fashion ecosystem. So Poshmark is the hub, and social media is the megaphone amplifying your reach.
Exactly. It's about connecting all the dots and making sure your brand is consistent across the board.
Yeah.
But there's one more strategy the guide talks about that I'm kind of curious about, cross-listing.
Cross-listing, isn't that risky? What if you sell the same thing on different platforms and end up with a total mess?
That's the trade-off for sure. Cross-listing can get you more exposure, but the guide really stresses that you have to be on top of your inventory. Otherwise, you could end up selling the same thing twice, and that's a problem.
So proceed with caution. But even if your inventory is perfect, wouldn't listing on other platforms kind of water down your Poshmark brand?
That's another good point. The guide doesn't really go into that, but it's worth thinking about. It's a balance, right? Reaching more people, but also keeping your brand strong.
Okay, so we've covered a ton today.
Yeah.
Setting up shop, taking amazing photos, figuring out the algorithm, sourcing like a pro, even building a whole brand. Anything else aspiring Poshmark entrepreneurs should know?
There's one more super important thing we need to talk about: the rules of the game. The guide have a whole section on common Poshmark mistakes, and it's not just about ethics.
Okay, let's hear it. What are the biggest Poshmark no-nos?
We already touched on some, like bad photos and descriptions that aren't accurate, but there's more. Slow shipping is a big one.
Yeah, that makes sense. In online shopping, speed is king, and I bet bad communication is just as bad.
Absolutely. Quick replies and updates are a must. And of course, never ever sell fake stuff. Poshmark has zero tolerance for that. They'll ban you.
Right, that's not just unethical, it's illegal. But what about things that are a little less clear-cut? The guide mentions avoiding spammy comments. What does that mean on Poshmark?
It means being genuine. Don't just leave generic comments on people's listings. Give real compliments. Ask thoughtful questions. Participate in a way that feels real and helpful.
So it's about building real connections, not just trying to game the system.
Yeah.
That seems to be a theme with this guide, the importance of community.
For sure. And that's what makes Poshmark so unique. It's not just about buying and selling. It's a place for people to connect over their love of fashion.
I love that. It really is like a giant online fashion party where everyone is welcome. Speaking of parties, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed with all this Poshmark wisdom. Any way to break this whole hustle down into smaller steps?
Absolutely. The key is to start small and focus on one thing at a time. Don't try to do everything at once.
So maybe start with perfecting my listings, then move on to sourcing, then tackle branding, like that.
Exactly. And remember, it's a journey, not a race. There will be bumps in the road, but that's all part of learning.
Okay, feeling more confident already. But before we get too deep into the how-to, there's something else I'm curious about, the whole money side of Poshmark.
Ah, yes. The not so glamorous, but very important part of running a business. The guide does mention this. They stress knowing how Poshmark's fees work.
So how does Poshmark make money? What fees do sellers need to be aware of?
Poshmark takes a cut of every sale. The percentage changes depending on the price. It's all laid out in their terms of service.
Okay, so I got to build those fees into my pricing to make sure I'm actually making a profit. What about sales tax? Does Poshmark handle all that?
It's kind of complicated. Poshmark does collect and pay sales tax in most states, but it's always good to double-check the rules where you live.
So do your research and know the rules. What about income tax? Do I have to report my Poshmark earnings?
Definitely. You have to treat your Poshmark hustle like a real business, even if it's a side gig. That means keeping track of all your income and expenses and reporting it all on your taxes.
Okay, so it's not just about taking pictures and sharing listings. It's running a real business with all that entails. But even with the challenges, I'm still pretty excited about this whole Poshmark thing.
That's the spirit.
Yeah.
And there's one more thing from the guide that really stuck with me. It's not a specific strategy, more of a mindset thing.
Ooh, I love a good mindset shift. What's the secret to Poshmark's success?
It's all about community and working together. The guide talks about how Poshmark is more than just a place to buy and sell. It's a place where people connect over their love of fashion.
I've definitely been getting that feeling throughout this whole deep dive. It's not just about competing with each other, it's about supporting each other and celebrating everyone's successes.
Exactly. And that's what makes Poshmark so special. It's a place where anyone can build a business, be creative, and make real connections.
I'm feeling so inspired right now. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, is there anything else we need to cover?
Actually, there is one last piece of advice I want to give you. Something that's not in the guide, but is super important for Poshmark's success. And it might surprise you.
Okay, now I'm really curious. What's the secret ingredient?
It's simple, really. Have fun. Poshmark should be enjoyable, not a chore. If you're not passionate about fashion and the excitement of the hustle, it'll show in your listings and how you interact with buyers.
That's so true. It's easy to get caught up in the logistics and the numbers, but at the end of the day, it's all about passion.
Exactly. So as you start your Poshmark journey, remember to enjoy the ride. Celebrate your wins, learn from your mistakes, and let your personality shine through. And speaking of letting your personality shine through, there's one more aspect of Poshmark that we haven't even touched on yet.
Oh, now I'm really intrigued. What's this hidden gem of Poshmark wisdom?
Well, you know how we've been talking about Poshmark being a constantly evolving platform? It's not just about new features and updates.
Yeah.
It's also about how people are using the platform and the trends that are emerging. And there's one trend in particular that I think is going to be huge for Poshmark sellers.
Oh, trends. Now we're talking.
Right.
I'm always up for staying ahead of the curve. What's the next big thing on Poshmark?
It's all about Posh stories.
Posh stories. Okay, I gotta be honest, I haven't really messed with those. What's the big deal?
Think of it like Poshmark's version of Instagram stories, those little, visual snippets that disappear after 24 hours. It's a great way to add something extra to your Poshmark presence.
So my closet shows my style, but Posh stories show in.
Yeah, exactly. It brings your brand to life, makes it more relatable. You can use them to, show off new items, give sneak peeks of upcoming sales, even just share some styling tips or connect with your followers on a more personal level.
It's like that behind-the-scenes look, adds some personality, but is it really worth the effort? I feel like I'm already juggling photos and descriptions and sharing.
The cool thing about Posh Stories is they can be quick and casual. It doesn't have to be super polished content. Think of it as micro-marketing, those little moments that grab attention and keep people engaged.
So I could post a quick story about a flash sale I'm running, or maybe show myself out thrifting for new stuff.
Exactly. And get this, you can actually add links to your Poshmark listings right in your Posh Stories. So if someone sees a cool top in your story, boom, they can click and buy it right then and there.
That's smart. Makes it super easy for people to shop. But I'm still trying to picture, are people actually using Posh Stories to shop?
It's still kind of under the radar, which is actually a good thing. It's your chance to stand out from the crowd. Plus, Poshmark is really pushing stories, so it's only a matter of time before everyone's doing it.
All right, you've convinced me. Posh Stories it is. But with all these strategies we're talking about, sharing, sourcing, branding, now Posh Stories, how do I keep track of what's actually working?
That's where data comes in handy. Poshmark has this thing called My Sales Report, and it's a goldmine. It shows you which items are selling, your average selling price, even how much you're making after fees. It's like your own Poshmark financial advisor.
So I can see what's hot, what's not, and use that to, tweak my approach.
Exactly. No more guessing. You can see your top-selling brands, which sizes are in demand, even how different ways of listing things affect your sales.
It's like data-driven fashion. But all this analysis, doesn't it risk turning a fun side hustle into a spreadsheet nightmare?
It's all about balance.
What?
The data is there to guide you, not rule your life. Use it to make smart choices, but don't let it kill your creativity. Remember, passion is still key.
Right, the human touch is still important. Speaking of the human element, I think it's time we address something we haven't yet. The ethical and legal side of Poshmark?
Absolutely. You got to know the rules, play by the book. Poshmark takes this stuff seriously, and we have a responsibility to run our businesses the right way.
So, no selling fakes, no misleading descriptions, no spamming people the basics, but what about the less obvious stuff? The guide mentions disclosing alterations to clothing. How specific do I need to be?
When in doubt, be transparent. If you've changed something, even if it's just hemming pants, mention it in your listing. It's about being upfront and building trust with buyers.
Makes sense. What about things like sales tax and income tax? Does Poshmark handle all that for sellers?
It's a bit tricky. Poshmark collects and pays sales tax in most places, but it's always smart to check the rules in your specific state. And for income tax, you're on your own. You got to report your Poshmark earnings to the IRS.
So even if it's a side hustle, you got to treat Poshmark like a real business.
Absolutely. Keep track of all your income and expenses, maybe even talk to a tax person if you need to. Make sure you're following all the rules.
Okay, we've covered a lot today. From the nitty-gritty of Poshmark's algorithm to the importance of data and ethics, I feel like I just got a crash course in Poshmark mastery.
You're a quick study. But remember, there's always more to learn. The Poshmark world is always changing, and the best sellers are the ones who stay curious, try new things, and never stop learning.
Right. It's all about adapting and evolving. Speaking of evolving, I'm wondering, what happens after you've mastered the basics? What does it look like to take your Poshmark game to the next level, to become a real Poshmark powerhouse?
That's a great question. And it's something the guide kind of touches on toward the end. It's not just about selling individual pieces anymore.
Don't leave me hanging.
It's about thinking bigger, about creating an experience.
Creating an experience. So like going beyond just selling individual items.
Exactly. It's about building a brand that people trust, a brand they turn to for style inspiration. The guide touches on that.
Okay, I'm listening. How do you actually do that?
Well, think about it. People are busy. They don't always have time to browse through tons of listings and put together outfits. They want things to be easy. They want curated looks.
So instead of just selling separate pieces, I could create like pre-styled outfits or capsule wardrobes.
You got it. The guide calls it bundle selling, but it's more than just, offering a discount on a bunch of stuff. It's about putting together looks that people can see themselves wearing, complete outfits that solve their style problems.
It's like a personal styling service, but through my Poshmark closet. But how do I know what looks to create? Do I need to be a mind reader?
Not quite. Remember all that data we talked about? That could be super helpful here. Look at your sales history. See which items people are buying together, what brands and styles are doing well. It'll give you clues about what your audience wants.
So use data to guide my creative choices. Make bundles that are stylish and strategic.
Exactly. And think beyond just clothes. You can bundle accessories, shoes, even beauty products. Anything that completes the look and makes the whole shopping experience better.
This is blowing my mind. It takes all the guesswork out of getting dressed. But how do you market these bundles? Do I need to do like full-on photo shoots for every combination?
This is where Posh stories can really shine. You can show off your bundles in action, create little styling videos, even give people a behind-the-scenes look at your process. It's all about bringing those looks to life.
I love it. It's like having a mini fashion show, but right in my Poshmark closet. But this whole styling thing, isn't that more for like fashion experts? I'm no Anna Wintour.
You don't have to be a fashion icon to give styling advice. It's about showing your own style, your own point of view. People are drawn to that realness, to real people who love fashion and want to help others feel good.
That makes me feel better. So even if my style is more everyday chic than high fashion, I can still offer some helpful tips.
Totally. In fact, showing a mix of styles and prices can actually help you reach more people.
Wow, the possibilities are endless. But with all these strategies, bundle selling, data, Posh stories, styling, it's a lot to keep track of. How do I keep it all straight?
Remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Start with one thing, get good at it, then move on to the next. And don't be afraid to experiment. There's no one right way to succeed on Poshmark.
So it's about finding what works for me, for my style, for my brand.
You got it. And never forget, the most important thing is passion. If you love fashion, if you love the creative side of it, that will show and make your Poshmark experience so much better.
I'm so fired up right now. Poshmark is more than just buying and selling. It's a way to be creative, build a community, turn your passion into a real business.
That's exactly it. And that's what makes Poshmark so awesome. It's a place for anyone to become an entrepreneur, build a brand they're proud of, and connect with other people who love fashion.
Well, I'm ready to jump in. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive into the world of Poshmark. I feel like I've got the knowledge and the inspiration to turn my Poshmark hustle into something amazing.
Happy poshing.